Do you want to learn how you can write custom hooks, which work with the Lambda Hooks NPM package to help reduce the amount of code that you have to write? In this video, that is exactly what I'm going to teach you how to do. Hi guys, my name is Sam with Complete Coding, where our aim is to make you into the best developer that you can be. In this video, we are going to look at the next lesson with Lambda Hooks. In the last video, we learned how we can set up basic hooks and use the hooks that are provided with the package itself. In this video, we're going to take it one step further by writing our own hooks. This allows us to add much more functionality to our hooks and do things that are specific to just ourselves, such as validating that the JSON body that is coming down is in the format that we expect. Now that we're in the code, we can start creating our custom hooks and also creating a new version of with hooks that includes these extra hooks. The hooks that we're going to be writing today are one that validates the event body and one that validates the path parameters in the event. So what we're going to do is first create a new with hooks and call this one const hooks with validation. And as I said before, this is going to be validating the body and the paths. So we need to define those. We're going to be defining those with a schema. So we're going to have the body schema and the path schema. And these are going to go into a function. With here, we are returning a use object, and what we're actually going to do is copy this use objects into here and return it. At the moment, this is going to return exactly the same set of hooks as the previous version, but what we're going to do now is where the changes are going to come. As well as taking an object containing the before, after, and on error, this use hooks also takes a config parameter. Inside this config parameter, we are going to pass in the body schema and we're going to pass in the path schema. So now we have this hooks with validation, and we're going to add that to our exports. We now have a schema for the body and the path, but neither of our hooks before are doing anything with those schemas. So now we are actually going to get down to writing our own hook. We're going to have one hook which is going to validate the event body. So if we go down here and say const validate event body, and with all of your hooks, these need to be an async function which takes a state, and in here we need to return a state at the end. In between those 2 points, we can do whatever we want to the state. We can mutate the event, the config, or anything else in between. If you want to find out what exactly is on state, then I'll link below to the npm repo where you can find out what is in the state object. So, as I said before, we pass the body and path schema into the config. So we're going to extract the body schema. So const body schema equals state.config. So this is just getting that schema value from there. And the first thing we need to do is check that a schema for the body has been passed up. So if there is not a body schema, then we need to throw an error. And this is simply going to be missing the required body schema. If we've got past this point, we know that we have the body schema. So what we're going to do is we're going to validate it. Because we're using yup to create this schema, which I'll talk about in a little bit, we can use a try catch and then an await on a validate. So try. The first thing we need to do is get the event from the state. So const event equals state, and then await body schema dot validate. And what we're doing here is the yup library allows you to have a schema and add dot validate and pass in the data that you want to validate. So for us, this is event dot body, and also some config if you'd like. So for us, this is going to be strict is true. So if the event body does match the body schema, then this will work fine. If it doesn't, then it is going to hit the catch. So let's add that catch. So in here, the first thing we want to do is log out the error. So console.log yup validation error of event.body and then the error. We also need to say that we want to exit from our validator. So state.exit equals true. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell the Lambda Hooks library that something has gone wrong and that we need to stop running this Lambda. And finally, we need to define a response object. So state.response equals an object status code of 400 and a body of JSON.stringify. In here, we're going to have an object with error and error.message. So if there has been an error inside this validation, we're going to say that there has been an error. We're going to say that we should exit after running this hook. And here is the response to send back if it is an API response. At the end of all this, we need to return the state. And this is our validating event body hook all completed. We can now scroll up to here and actually add it to our list of before events. This needs to come after the parse event, as in here we're expecting event.body to already be the JSON object. So in here we can now add validate event body. So now that has happened, what we can do is repeat the process for the path schema. So I'm actually going to copy the whole of this validate event body, change it to validate paths, change all of the references of body schema to path schema. So we're getting the path schema from the config. If there isn't one, we're saying we're missing the required path schema. We're getting the event from the state. We're going to validate the path schema against, instead of the event.body, it's going to be event.path parameters, which is one of the values that gets passed up on the event object from API Gateway. Finally, we're going to say that there's been a validation error of path parameters and return a 400. So this will work in exactly the same way as the validating event body. So we can add this onto our set of hooks, validate event paths, and save that. And now we have exported that. So this is all of our work that we need to do inside our hooks.js. We can now jump across into our create player score, where we can set up the next step. The next step for us is actually defining the schemas. As I've mentioned before, we're using a library called yup. So what we're going to do is npm install --save yup. And yup is a schema library for JavaScript, which allows us to describe the shape of parameters that were being passed in. So now, after our with hooks, I can say that const yup equals require yup. And now I can describe both of the body schema and the path schema. So const body schema, and this is going to be a yup object, and it is going to have a shape of this. So we know that the body for our create player score needs a name and it needs a score. Now with the name, we know that we want it to be a string. So this is yup.string, and we can add another parameter onto here, which is .required. So this means that yup knows that a name has to be a string and it has to be on the body object. We can do the same thing with a score, where it's a yup.number, and this one is also required. Now we've defined the body schema, we can do the same for the path schema. So const path schema equals yup.object .shape, and with the path parameters in here, we know that it needs to have a path parameter of ID. So in here we can go with ID and set that to be yup.string.required. If we save this, what we can actually do is we can remove this check at the start, as that will be handled by our path schema validation. We can now go down to the bottom and we need to change this handler a little bit. So instead of using with hooks, we can use hooks with validation. So if I copy this from our hooks file, and this requires a body schema and a path schema, which we have just defined. So the body schema and path schema, which then takes in a handler and works as we did before. So this is the whole file, and the last thing I need to do is actually just import with hooks with validation from our common hooks file so that it is available to use here. That is all of the code that we need to do. So to run over that, we've created a new set of use hooks that has 2 extra hooks, but also takes a body and path schema. We've written our own custom hook, which takes the body schema and checks that it's valid, and then validates our event body. If it fails, it returns a 400. And finally, we've created a similar one for the paths, but in this case, we're validating the event.path parameters. If we now go into our terminal and run SLS deploy, this will deploy our new application with these hooks, and we'll be able to test that this all works. Now that that has finished deploying, we can actually test it out. If you scroll up to your endpoints and find the create player score endpoint, what we can do is copy all of that and head over to Postman. We need to use Postman as this is a post request, so we can't just do it from a browser. So that means we need to change our request type to post. And now we have the create player score and need to put in an ID. Here I'm just going to put in a random set of numbers and letters, and we are ready to add a body. So it's a raw body of the type JSON, and now we have our object. In here we need a name, and this name is going to be Claire, and a score of 25. Now, what we'd expect is for this to succeed. So what we're going to do first is we're going to remove and change some of these values to check that our validator is working. So first we're going to remove the score and hit send. When we hit send, we get an error message of score is a required field, which is exactly what comes back from the validator. So now if we undo this and we change Claire from being a string, name from being a string to being a number. Now if we hit send, it says that the name must be a string, and it was actually 322. So again, that is catching not only that the field is present, but the type of the request and the field value. So if we go now back to a name of Claire and a score of 25, we hit send and we get the new user as we would have expected all along. This is great as we now know that every time someone makes a request to our endpoint, it has been validated against our schema. In this case, we've got a very simple schema, but as you work with more complicated APIs and more advanced endpoints, you may have schemas that are very large and complex. And trying to test that without a library such as yup for validating the schema can become really complicated. And even then, you don't want to have to do that at the start of every single Lambda endpoint that you're creating. So now that we have this hooks with validation, we can use this on any post request. All we need to do is pass in a body and path schema, and it will validate it for us. In this video, we have taken what we learnt in the last video a step further by writing our own hooks for the Lambda Hooks npm package. This has been really good for us as we are able to remove the validation of our JSON object that we're expecting to receive whenever a user creates a new score, and moving that into a common hooks repo. This is really good because it allows us not only to validate this, but every other time that we receive an object, we can define a schema to describe the object we want to receive, and then we automatically can validate that that is the object that we're getting. This stops unwanted data ending up in our database, or data ending up that's missing fields that we need to be able to carry on with our work. If you've liked this video or learnt something new, make sure to hit that like button, as it really helps YouTube suggest this video to more developers like yourselves. And if you haven't done already, make sure to subscribe down here so that you can get notified next time we release a video. Thank you, and I'll see you again in the next video.